Few love stories have survived, like Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. It was first published in 1813. It's been retold, reimagined, and referenced so many times that even people who've never read the book know about Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy's love story. It's an enemies to lovers trope, and Jane Austen did it better than most modern rom-coms. When it comes to screen adaptations, two versions spark debate. I've even found myself discussing the two at a book club, and everybody joined in with their opinions. On one side, you have the 1995 BBC miniseries, which was 6 glorious hours of Empire wastelands, bonnets, Collinforth brooding, and the infamous lake scene that changed period drama forever. On the other side, you have the 2005 film, which was directed by Joe Wright, starring Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden, a cinematic whirlwind of moody rain proposals, sweeping camera shots, and the kind of romance that makes you forget the entire cast probably smelled a little bit like wet sheep. This version came out when I was 10, and I remember getting the DVD and watching it over and over and over again. But in this video, we're going to compare both adaptations, how they shape Elizabeth and Darcy, how they both are different from the book, how the Bennett sisters add chaos and charm, what people love to talk about with each version, and of course, we'll ask the big question, why does Pride and Prejudice still resonate over 2 centuries later? But before we get into all of that, hey friends, welcome to my channel. I'm DMARI. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on your bell notifications so you get notified every time I upload. And also make sure to like the video if you liked it. And please leave a comment down below letting me know which adaptation is your favorite. So now, let's talk about Elizabeth Bennet. We're going to start with the woman who really carried the whole story, Elizabeth Bennet. She's witty, she's independent, she's not afraid to roll her eyes at pompous men, and she might just be my first introduction to a side-eye queen. Austen gave us a heroine who feels modern, even though she was written over 200 years ago, which is probably why every adaptation has its own spin on her. In the 1995 BBC version, Jennifer I'm not sure, plays Elizabeth with a quiet intelligence and subtle wit. She's composed, sharp, and you can see every judgment and clever observation flicker right across her face. But she always keeps her composure. This Elizabeth is less about storming across the fields in her dress and getting it muddy, and more about cutting someone down with a single polite remark. She's sophisticated, restrained, and for many fans, the definitive Lizzie. Then we jump to the 2005 with Keira Knightley's Elizabeth. And suddenly, she's got an edge. This Elizabeth is fiery, playful, quick to laugh, and also quick to lose her patience. She's less concerned with looking composed and more concerned with being unapologetically herself. She teases Darcy, stomps through the rainstorms, not afraid to slam a door or two if she has to. Some critics say she feels too modern, but others argue that Austen's Elizabeth was always ahead of her time. So Knightley just amplifies what was already there. I personally related to her a lot when I was young, like I mentioned earlier. I didn't see the BBC series until I was an adult, so this version of Elizabeth really holds a special place for me. So who was the better Elizabeth? Honestly, it depends on what you want from her. Do you prefer a subtle, clever wit, like the 1995, kind of woman who can absolutely destroy you in a drawing room without even raising her voice? Or do you prefer Knightley's passionate Lizzie, who's ready to burn down the drawing room if she has to? That's just how I feel about her. Both interpretations remind us why Elizabeth is such a timeless heroine. She's smart, independent, and refuses to settle for less than real love. And that lesson is just as relevant now as it was in 1813. Now, of course, we cannot talk about Elizabeth without talking about Mr. Darcy, the human embodiment of awkward silences, questionable manners, and some seriously hidden romantic depth. He starts as the guy you love to hate and somehow ends up as the guy you, still kind of hate sometimes, but now you're also in love with him, and that is the magic of Darcy, in my opinion. In the 1995 miniseries, Collinforth plays Darcy as the ultimate brooding aristocrat. He's cold, stiff, and so aristocratically proper that you have to expect him to break into a lecture on estate management at any moment. But that's exactly what makes his eventual softening so satisfying. It's a 6-hour slow burn that climaxes in the now iconic lake scene. It probably did more for white linen shirts than any fashion campaign ever could. First, Darcy was all about restraint until he isn't, and then you're ruined. Jump to 2005. Matthew McFadden gives us a completely different Darcy. Instead of icy superiority, we get a man who's playfully shy. That's the vibe I always got from him. Proud aristocrat and more introvert who just happens to own half of Derbyshire. And the rain-soaked confession scene is basically the polar opposite of Firth's lake moment. It's messy, emotional, and so awkward that it's endearing. when we watch the movie, you feel like it had so much to say, but he didn't know how to say it. And I feel like this is proven when he writes Elizabeth the letter about Mr. Wickham instead of talking to her about it. I thought the letter was so on brand for him. The conversation was too emotionally charged for him to have it in person, but he found a way to privately tell Elizabeth what he wanted her to know, and I just love that. So which Darcy's better? Firth's polished classic gentleman who slowly unfreezes, or McFadden's tender awkward man who blurts out his feelings in the rain like a lovesick teenager? Either way, both versions highlight why Darcy endures. Beneath all the pride and some stammering, he is a man who is willing to change for love, and that never goes out of style. Now, as easy as it is to get swept away in all of the Lizzie and Darcy drama, let's not forget that the Bennet household was a crowded one. Elizabeth's sisters, Jane, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, are not just filler characters. They're Austen's way of showing us the spectrum of womanhood in her world. Each sister is a mirror, a contrast, sometimes a warning for Elizabeth, and in the adaptations, the sisters get treated differently. Let's start with Jane. Jane is the eldest and the beauty of the family. She's sweet, gentle, and so kind, sometimes at borderlines frustrating. In the 1995 series, Jane, who is played by Susanna Harker, feels almost angelic, supreme, modest, perfectly composed, the embodiment of feminine virtue. In the 2005 film, Rosamund Pike brings more nuance. She's still breathtakingly kind, but her quiet longing for Bingley feels more emotionally raw. Both Janes, though, serve as a foil to Elizabeth. Where Lizzie is sharp and skeptical, Jane is soft and trusting, proof that kindness and resilience can exist side by side. Then we have Lydia, the family's wild child, the cautionary tale wrapped in ribbons and giggles. She's boy crazy, reckless, and the embodiment of an unchecked teenage impulse. In 1995, Julius Saula, I know I'm saying that wrong, plays Lydia almost comedically, a whirlwind of silliness that's fun until it isn't. By the time she runs off with Wickham, it's shocking, but not entirely surprising. In 2005, Jenna Malone makes Lydia feel more like an actual teenager, still ridiculous, but with kind of a vulnerable immaturity that makes her downfall a little more sad. Lydia reminds us that in Austen world, one girl's mistake could ruin an entire family's future. Then we have Mary, and oh, Mary, the middle sister who's usually left in the corner with her books and her piano skills. In the 1995 series, Mary, who is played by Lucy Briars, gets more screen time, awkward, self-righteous, and unintentionally kind of funny. She's the one who insists on moral lessons nobody asked for. She's often played for comedy, but there's a tragic edge to her, the forgotten sister trying desperately to stand out. In the 2005 film, Mary was played by Tallulah Riley. She's quieter, more melancholy, almost fading into the background, which ironically makes her feel more forgotten than ever. Mary matters because she highlights the reality of women in Austen's world. Not every sister gets a happy ending or even a storyline. Some simply just vanish into the margins. And let's not forget about poor Kitty Bennet, though most adaptations tend to. She often gets lumped in as Lydia's shadow, coughing in the background or giggling in the wrong moment. In the novel, Kitty is very influenced, and some might say corrupted, by Lydia's recklessness. She's easily led, often silly, more of a follower than a leader, but there's something really real about her role. How many of us have had a sibling or a friend whose personality completely overshadowed ours, putting us into trouble we might not have found on our own? Kitty represents that vulnerability, the young woman who hasn't yet found her own voice, swept along by the strongest personality in the room. What's interesting is that Austen does give her a bit of hope in the book's ending, which we'll talk about later. Before we keep pitting 1995 and the 2005 versions against each other, it's worth stepping back and asking, how do they compare to Jane Austen's original novel? Because while both adaptations capture the spirit of Pride and Prejudice, neither is a perfect mirror of the text. For starters, the novel's Elizabeth is a little different from both Jennifer Eel's subtle composure and Keira Knightley's fiery spirit. In the book, Elizabeth is witty, yes, but she's also far more restrained than the 2005 film suggests. Austen's Lizzie doesn't stomp through the fields for dramatic effect, though it is a fantastic visual choice, and she doesn't wear her heart on her sleeve like Knightley's character kind of does. She's sharp and observant and occasionally cutting, but always within the limits of social decorum. In many ways, she is much closer to the 1995 BBC series. Darcy also comes across differently in the text. In the novel, his pride is rooted in class and consciousness and genuine social awkwardness. Both adaptations capture parts of this, but 1995 leans heavily into the aristocratic pride, while 2005 leans into the awkwardness. In the book, however, Darcy simply isn't brooding or shy. He's complex, intelligent, and very aware of the responsibilities that come with his wealth and status. He eventually gets vulnerable, and the transformation feels less about romantic movie timing and more about genuine growth over time. Then we have the sisters. The novel gives Mary, Kitty, and especially Lydia more narrative weight than the 2005 version allows. Mary's sermons, Lydia's chaos, Kitty's impressionability, they're threaded throughout the story to highlight constant pressure on the Bennett family's reputation. In the 1995 series, with its 6 hours of runtime, it does come closer to representing this, though even there, some nuance gets lost in the need to dramatize. Finally, the tone of the novel is a little sharper and funnier than either adaptation. Austen's biting social commentary and dry humor are very awkward in the text. Mr. Collins is much more than just awkward comedic relief. He's satire embodied. The book constantly pokes at class, gender, marriage, while the adaptations, particularly the 2005 film, focus more squarely on romance. Neither is wrong, but it does change the flavor of the story depending on which version you encounter. So when fans argue about which one is better, it's good to remember both are interpretations, not carbon copies. Austen's original work lives somewhere in between them, offering wit, restraint, romance, and social critique in equal measure, but it's generally agreed that the 1995 series is a closer match, but it's probably because there was just a lot more time. One of the biggest differences between Austen's book and both the 1995 and 2005 adaptations is the ending. In the novel, Austen doesn't just stop at Elizabeth and Darcy's happily ever after. She gives us a full roll call of what happened to the Bennet sisters, like a Regency-era epilogue where every loose thread gets tied up. We learn that Jane and Bingley settle nearby, happily married close to Elizabeth. Lydia and Wickham, despite their scandalous elopement, continue their marriage in relative misery. They're, in my opinion, Austen's reminder that impulsive choices have lasting consequences. Mary stays at home, permanently stuck in the shadow of her sisters, and Kitty, once separated from Lydia's bad influence, grows up a bit and becomes more sensible. Austen wanted us to see not just the romance, but the long-term outcomes of these characters' decisions. Neither adaptation gives us that full wrap-up. In 1995, the series ended with a double wedding of Elizabeth and Darcy, and Jane and Bingley, which feels complete but skips over the fates of the younger sisters. The 2005 film is even more condensed, closing with a romantic candlelit moment between Elizabeth and Darcy. It's beautiful and cinematic, but it leaves out Austen's wider commentary on family, class, and consequence. By trimming away those final details, the adaptations put the spotlight almost only on romance, while the book reminds us that marriage is only one part of a much bigger picture. And of course, no conversation about Pride and Prejudice adaptations would be complete without mentioning the zombies. Yes, in 2009, Seth Grahame-Smith mashed Austen's classic with The Walking Dead, and in 2016, it even made it to the big screen. And suddenly, Elizabeth wasn't just fending off unwanted suitors, she was slicing through undead hordes in full Regency attire. It's absurd, it's campy, depending on who you ask. It's either a crime against literature or just a really funny way of proving how flexible Austen's story really is. If a 200-year-old romantic comedy can survive a zombie apocalypse, it's probably here to stay. Now that we've talked about how the adaptations differ from Austen's book, let's get into the fun part, what people actually love and sometimes love to complain about in each version. Because if there's one thing Pride and Prejudice fans enjoy almost as much as Lizzie and Darcy's banner, it's passionately debating which adaptation is better. In the 1995 miniseries, we're going to start there. Fans adore this version's first faithfulness to the novel. With nearly 6 hours to work with, it doesn't have to cut much, and it lets the story breathe. We get to savor Elizabeth's wit, Darcy's slow transformation, and the awkward family dinners in glorious detail. Jennifer Eels' Elizabeth often is hailed as more book accurate, and Colin Firth's Darcy, well, let's just say the lake scene became a cultural reset moment It's brooding, it's smoldering, it's slightly ridiculous, and we're still talking about it decades later. But for all of its strengths, the 1995 version does get some criticism. Its pacing can feel kind of slow to modern audiences. 6 hours of polite conversation and long walks across the lawn is not everyone's idea of thrilling television. Some viewers often feel that first Darcy, while iconic, is a little too stiff at times, making his eventual warmth a little harder to connect with. But still, for many fans, this version is the definitive adaptation, the gold standard of literary faithfulness. Then there's the 2005 film. This one is beloved for very different reasons. Joe Wright gave us all the lush cinematic take on Pride and Prejudice that feels more romantic, more intimate, and I think more emotionally accessible. The sweeping camera shots, the moody lighting, the rain-soaked proposal, it was all very aesthetically pleasing. Keira Knightley's Elizabeth is fiery and relatable, and Matthew McFadden's Darcy has a raw awkwardness that makes his vulnerability unforgettable. And let's not forget that hand flexing after they touched moment, arguably one of the most viral pieces of nonverbal acting in period drama history. Of course, the 2005 film is not without its critics. Some fans argue that it takes too many liberties, compressing the story, modernizing the characters' emotions, and skipping over a lot of the social satire in favor of romance. Some felt like Keira Knightley's Lizzie was too modern, or that the Bennett family was portrayed a bit too rough around the edges. But for a younger generation, or for viewers who find 6 hours too long, this version was the gateway into Austen's world, and that's no small thing. So, which one's better? Well, that depends on what you value. The 1995 series is about accuracy, detail, slow burn payoff, and 2005 is about atmosphere, emotion, romance. In other words, it's like one's like a carefully prepared 6-course meal, and the other is like dessert. So, after all this debate about adaptations, let's ask the bigger question. Why does Pride and Prejudice still resonate over 200 years later? Why do we keep coming back to Elizabeth and Darcy, whether it's in a 6-hour BBC miniseries or a 2-hour Hollywood film or a zombie mashup? It's because Austen's themes are timeless at its heart. This is a story about family, social pressure, and the messy business of falling in love. Elizabeth's independence, her refusal to marry just for money or convenience, feels surprisingly modern. She's proof that women want more in marriage than security long before that ideal was widely accepted. Darcy's arc, learning to see past pride, prejudice, and social barriers, still feels relatable in a world where first impressions and ego often get in the way of a real connection. The sisters also represent universal archetypes we still recognize. Jane's kindness, Lydia's impulsiveness, Mary's awkwardness, Kitty being a follower. We all know someone who fits these roles. Maybe the real secret to Jane Austen's endurance was her wit. She wasn't just writing a love story, she was satirizing society, poking fun at class, vanity, and the absurdities of polite culture. The fact that we can still laugh, swoon, and relate to these characters today shows just how sharp her observations were. Strip away the Empire waist dresses and horse-drawn carriages, and you're left with people navigating love, pride, mistakes, and second chances, and that never goes out of style. So whether you're Team 1995 or Team 2005 or even Team Zombies, one thing is clear, Pride and Prejudice is a story that refuses to fade. Colin Firth gave us brooding, aristocratic Darcy of legend. Matthew McFadden gave us tender, awkward Darcy. Jennifer Eel delivered Elizabeth with quiet wit, razor-sharp composure, while Keira Knightley gave us Lucy, who's fiery, compassionate, and absolutely unafraid to speak her mind. Both adaptations capture different sides of the story and different sides of the same character, and both are worth celebrating. But beyond the costumes, the proposals, and even the infamous lake scenes, Austen's story endures because it speaks something universal. We've all misjudged people, we've all let pride get in the way, and hopefully we've all learned, like Elizabeth and Darcy, that love is all about growth, humility, and truly seeing another person for who they are. Really, in my own opinion, I don't think that one is actually better than the other. I think that they both have different great qualities, and you can find something great about both of them. I did grow up with the 2005 version, and I think most people my age probably would pick that one. So sometimes I do find myself leaning more towards that one just because I grew up watching it, but I do love the miniseries. I love how long it is. I love that I get to dive into that story for 6 hours and experience it all. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. If you made it this far, put a yellow heart in the comments and let me know who your favorite Elizabeth is. I'll see you guys in the next one soon. Bye.